Noor Hindi is a Palestinian-American poet and reporter. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Poetry, Hobart, and Jubilat. Her essays have appeared or are forthcoming in American Poetry Review, Literary Hub, and Adroit Journal. Hindi is the equity and inclusion reporter for the Devil Strip magazine, and her website is noorhindi.com. Noor, welcome.
Thanks, Ron.
One of our festival books, The Poet X, is about a young woman discovering her voice and in the process discovering herself. She writes poems in her journal and then eventually gathers the courage to perform her poetry for others in a poetry slam. Can you tell us a little bit about the first time you performed your poetry for an audience?
Thanks for that question, Ron. So, man, you're taking me back all the way to high school. So I remember reading that book a couple years ago, and it also took me back to high school because that's how I started writing. I started from a journal. I actually will pull up my journal that I use all the time. I've been using the same kind of journal for years. And it was the beginning of it. You know, I started just writing in this, and it was following losing one of my family members suddenly. And it was a performance poem that I put together after being introduced to performance poetry. I was really in tune with watching, what is it called? I forget the name, Button Poetry. They have these amazing performances on YouTube. I was super inspired. And I remember being, 16 years old, in the depths of grief, feeling so lonely, and finding the courage to take my writing in front of my English classroom and just feeling like I'd reclaimed my voice for the first time and was able to actually express for the first time what I was feeling and the loss that I was sort of navigating in those months, and really young. And that was when I really tapped into, I think, the power that writing has in terms of just connecting us to other people and connecting us to ourselves.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Sure. Well, glad to have taken you back to high school.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh man, cringing.
You've come a long way in a fairly short amount of time since then. You've been performing and reading your poetry for groups for a while now. What's it like for you now, like whenever you get up on stage or behind the podium to share your poetry with the group?
It's sort of awkward because that was when I would finish a poem at 16, 17, 18, and 19, I was, I think, so much bolder about performing and excited about performing. And I really gave when I was writing the poems, I gave them a lot of attention in terms of how I would say certain words or where I would stop, or that artistic element to it. And I think when I moved away from the performance, I started focusing more on the page. And now for me, it is sort of a process of trial and error. Like sometimes I really love showing up to readings with newer, fresher work and kind of testing it out to an audience. I don't focus on the performance so much anymore, but I do believe every good poet needs to be able to speak in front of an audience and give life to their words. And it's such a gift because not everybody will access our poems on the page. Some people are more comfortable listening to them. And I feel like in the last couple years, especially, and during the pandemic, I really had to, I grieved going to readings because that was sort of my act of almost faith. Like it felt like sort of going to church, like being in a room full of people, intimately listening to a poem, reading a poem with a room full of people, and hearing those moments that resonate. That's community building, and I think an act of love. And so I really treasure being able to read in front of an audience now, though I don't perform as much as I used to.
Excellent. Yeah. being able to read in the audience, especially during the age of COVID, you have to find new ways,
Yeah,
uh,
Zoom is
like
not,
like
yeah,
Zoom.
yeah, not great.
It seems that you have that that burning desire to express yourself. I mean, it's got to burst out. It's got to come out in one way or another, and
Yeah.
it does for you in poetry. Um, Now, speaking of social issues, writing about the things that matter to us, another one of our festival books, We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices, is about expressions of individual identity and the need for social change. In the past few years, this country has continued to see hate crimes committed against many different groups.
Yeah.
Some writers choose to confront America's problems through poetry, echoing a long history of resistance. What social issues matter to you, and why do you choose poetry as a means of rising and resisting?
It's a really great question. It's a really, really good question. When I think about resistance and protest, I think about community. And I keep coming back to this word community because we can't, we as individuals, I don't think, can accomplish everything by ourselves. And we can't do it all. And I think there's power in unifying with other people. And for me, I found a lot of power in unifying with fellow Palestinian artists and poets who see me and hear me and have created these spaces where we can exist as our full selves. I think when you are marginalized in this country in some way, your identity is fractured, right? It seems like you're one person around this group of people and another person around this group of people, because you can't quite, I mean, it's an act of protection. You can't quite ever anticipate how people will receive you, how people will receive your identity. And there's sort of this self-editing and fracturing that occurs. And I've always found that poetry is a way where I could construct my own universe where I can exist in my full self. And when I write, I can connect to people who are maybe in the process of trying to find who they are, or maybe they found who they are, but now they're trying to be more in community. And so there's this beautiful connection that happens in this relationship between writer and reader that can happen. Um, and just speaking in terms of like protest and social justice, writing is so powerful. And a lot of people, it is a very lonely process, but you never know when you post something online who it's going to reach or who it's going to save or who needs that poem desperately in that moment, right?
Absolutely.
Who sees themselves in a line or a piece of work and they feel just a little bit less alone in this world, because it's lonely being marginalized. It's lonely watching the news and seeing people dying and your people dying. It's lonely walking through this country and not feeling heard or listened to. And I think there's something powerful about writing about what we love and what we feel is closest to our truths and sharing that with people.